Jesus shows God's strange love for all of us strangers. Grace and peace, everybody. Welcome to Sabbath School Study Group. This is part 2 of this 5-part series. Today we focus on Jesus' idea and attitude towards refugees and immigrants. And actually, when we look at this big picture, that's all of us. But before we go there, I need you to do 2 things. 1, please make sure if you haven't already subscribed to this channel. And 2, hit the like button. That's what makes this video easier to be seen and heard by others. Now, when we look at Jesus and understanding first how his goal is to mingle amongst us, what we're saying here is that there's this strange aspect of God's love to be drawn to those who are estranged from him. We would call them strangers. And he uses this word, and we can kind of localize it to say, well, if someone's an Israelite, then someone who's not an Israelite, that's a stranger. Hello, knock, knock. The Israelite is someone who by faith believes in God. And the Bible tells us clearly all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And because of sin, on a very real level, all of us are strangers. So the same way that God deals with a stranger is the same way that he deals with someone before they become an Israelite. And that's why he even said, hey, you Israelites, don't forget this. In Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 19, love ye therefore the stranger, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. God says, don't forget, you're all strangers. You all just pulled into the parking lot of grace at different times, but nobody was in this space. Everybody was expelled by virtue of their own choice from being in right relationship with me. So we can't look at refugees or immigrants, whether political, spiritual, or even emotional, and say that's them. That is all of us. And depending on what side of the cross you stand on, all of us are estranged from God. And that's why God says, I loved you all. I need you all to love them too. Down in Psalm 146, verse 9, the Lord preserveth the strangers. He relieveth the fatherless and widow. But the way of the wicked, he turneth upside down. You might remember what life was like before you accepted God. You may remember what life was like before you surrendered to Jesus and his righteousness, when we were trying to do our own thing, trying to make our own selves right. Or matter of fact, we even called our wrong right. We got to remember that God preserved us. And that Ziploc bag for you and for me is no smaller or no less available from someone or for someone who is currently outside of the bag, if you will. They haven't accepted that relationship. They're strangers in a strange land, whether it's this country or whether it's to the cross. And that attitude that we want to have of them is the same attitude that we got to have that God has. Now, remember, this doesn't mean that because someone is a stranger that we then give them right to stay strange. So with this mindset, it makes sense that God would say what he says here in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22. And when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field when thou reapest, neither shalt thou gather any gleaning of thy harvest. Thou shalt leave them unto the poor and to the stranger. I am the Lord your God. Now, this is where being a Christian and a believer, it's transcended. It goes beyond the politics and the cultural identity of what a refugee is. Because he's saying here, I want you to leave a little bit for those who are going through your field after you've gotten what you need in the harvest. Don't pick the bone dry, if you will. Leave a little bit for others to get. That's what, if you remember the story of Ruth, and when she went to go get the food that she got for her and her mother-in-law, it was because of this law, this idea of leaving a little bit for those who have less. We have to understand that the intent of this was so that they would want to become members of that land. Not stay estranged, but to become full-fledged members of the family of God. And you can extend this in whether it's in the political, even in the spiritual realm. The idea is that we're trying to become legal citizens of the kingdom, not trying to sneak in. God doesn't want us to sneak into a city that he already says is going to have 12 gates. His idea is, I want you to come in, but if you come in on my terms. And his terms are to come knowing that I feel your pain. I know what it's like to be outside of those gates. I know what it's like to be a stranger, and my heart is sympathetic to that. Let's go about the process of coming home. Because for all of us who have sinned, God has told us through Jesus Christ, heaven is our home. It's good to know that Jesus came to mingle. And he wants to mingle because he feels our pain, but he does not want us to stay in that pain. He wants us to come home. And you know that you have sympathy for those who are outside of the gates because you leave a little bit for them. It's speaking to the heart that I want them to come home. It's almost like leaving a little bit. So you're trying to woo them in to return, to come into the relationship that you have. That's what real sympathy does. It doesn't just say, I'm sorry that you have this struggle, or I'm sorry that you have this issue. I'm sorry, and I'm so sorry that I'm going to do everything in my power to empower you, to open the door for you to get out of that, to come home into this land, into this freedom, into this righteousness, into this grace. That's the power of godly sympathy.